So in the last class, basically we discussed the exact mechanism of how to allow restricted operations by a process. So we saw basically how when a process which is currently running, it basically issues a system call, which are APIs provided by this OS for user programs. And when a system call is made, basically within the system call there is a trap instruction issued, and that trap instruction basically helps helps to do these following three things. It allows the process to jump into kernel at some restricted locations. So those restricted locations, we said basically there is a trap table set up at the boot time. Yeah. So there is a trap table or interrupt descriptor table which is set up at the boot time by the OS, where for every different types of traps or different types of system calls, there are specific kernel code, specific function in the kernel code which are written, and those addresses of those function codes are written there. So you, by looking into this address, this trap table, the hardware knows where to jump into the kernel. So hardware basically jumps the execution into that specific kernel code, changes the privilege mode, changes the CPU mode bit, and then saves enough register state. So for that purpose, we said that there are two stacks available for every process. One is a regular user stack, which are used for regular procedure call. And the other is a kernel stack, which is basically a part of the kernel memory, the OS memory. And whatever data it needs to save during the kernel mode, the process uses this kernel stack. So to push and pop the data into this kernel on this kernel stack whenever the kernel mode is on, whenever the process is executing on the kernel mode. So that was the entire mechanism how how any process is allowed when the OS has given the control to a process, how that process can actually execute a privileged instruction or a not a privileged instruction but a restricted operations which are provided through system calls. So today we will be talking about the second problem. So the problem number 2 basically deals with switching between processes. So as I said, if OS gives, if OS is running and then it gives another process A to run on the CPU and start running, then how does OS regain the control? If OS wants to switch to another process, OS needs to regain the control. But when process A is running, OS is not running on the system. So OS has no control at that point of time. So how can he actually, the OS will allow that thing to happen? How can OS regain the control? So in early OS basically one of the approach which was used was a cooperative approach. So in this cooperative approach, the idea was that the OS will trust the processes when the OS has given a control to some process. OS will actually trust it that he is going to give back the control after some period of time, because what happens when a process is running anyhow, it is going to issue some system calls. It is going to regularly issue some system calls, and whenever a system call is issued, the control will again go back to OS. So we have seen whenever a system call is issued, again the kernel code start running. So obviously any process which is running, it's going to issue some of the system call at some point or the other. So the idea was the OS will wait for a system call to be issued, and we'll hope that A doesn't do something. Do some bad stuff. So hope that A is not going to basically monopolize the CPU. So that was the idea basically. Or there was some explicit system calls also. Let us say even if the system does not, if the process does not needs to do some restricted operation, there was explicit system calls like yield. So with this system call, basically when this system call is a process will call, it means basically that the OS wants to yield the process wants to yield the control back to OS. So this implicit trust was made by the OS that the process is going to either issue some system call or it will yield itself. But as you said, this is it's not an ideal situation, because what if A is not a good process? If A wants to do something bad, or let us say if maliciously or even unintentionally, just it basically runs an infinite loop. So we all do this mistake whenever we have written programs earlier, beginning programs. Many times we have run an infinite loop. So what if that happens? If a process runs into an infinite loop, then OS will have no other recourse except to what should be done in that case? How can you terminate the process A? If if the OS is, if the cooperative approach is being implemented and A runs into an infinite loop, is there any recourse to stop that process and again regain the control? OS can regain the control.
Sir, can you put it on block or something? Like the ready state and all that we had.
But who will put? Because OS is not in control. The CPU currently, the process A is running on the CPU. So whatever instruction can be issued is by the process A only.
If
So in that case,
sorry, if a program is running for more than a specified amount of time, then probably the OS will get the control somehow.
Yeah, but how that thing has to be, some mechanism has to be there. So yeah, so we'll come to that mechanism. So but in this approach, there is no way, if OS is waiting for A to relinquish the control, then you have no other way except to hard reboot. You have to switch off the power button, and you have to reboot the system. So that is and in fact that is many times actually we do that when system hangs or something happens which OS is not able to recover or something. What we do basically, we just we just reboot the system using the power button. So that was basically done earlier. So there is a recent design of OS is based on non-cooperative approach. So here the idea is OS will preempt based on using some hardware support. So OS will explicitly preempt if a process A has run after sufficient time and A has not relinquished the control back, then there has to be some preemptive method by which OS will basically stop the process A, and for that he will use hardware. So early from very beginning, actually system developers realized that hardware support is very crucial for many things, and we'll see in the entire course for different types of mechanisms, we'll see a slight support from hardware actually eases the job of OS to a significant extent. Otherwise, without that hardware support, OS has to do some very complicated things to manage the system. So in this case, the hardware support comes in the form of timer interrupt. So there is a timer inbuilt into the system hardware, basically which goes off after every few milliseconds, and it issues an interrupt after every few milliseconds, whatever time it's set. So at the boot time, basically when OS is running or the kernel code is running, so we saw it sets up the trap handler or trap table, but along that it also starts the timer interrupt. So as soon as the system will boot up, before OS does any other thing, first of all it sets up the trap handlers and it immediately starts the timer interrupt. So when the timer interrupt starts, then OS is assured that after some time, whatever, no matter whom I give control, after some time I will eventually regain the control. So after this timer interrupt is going to basically go off after every few milliseconds. So that is also set by the OS. Let us say X milliseconds. After X milliseconds, the value of X is also set by the OS. And OS can disable this timer interrupt also. At some point, if he wants to disable this timer interrupt, it can do that. But only OS can do this. This will be a privileged instruction to either set the timer or stop the timer. Will be a privileged instruction which only OS can do. OS does not even give a system call for a process to do that, because none of the process should be able to start or stop the timer. Okay, so what happens when a timer interrupt goes off? When timer interrupt is raised, then first of all, the hardware basically will get involved. It will stop the currently running process. Is halted. Second, it will save enough state of the process. And third, a pre-configured interrupt handler in the OS will run. So just like for different system calls, there is specific trap handler. Similarly, for this timer interrupt also, there will be a specific handler in the OS. There will be a specific function which will run when the timer interrupt is raised. And the address of that will also be stored in the trap table or the handler table, the interrupt descriptor table. So thus, with this thing, OS will again regain control. So OS is now again running. So when this happens, OS regains the control. Which was basically our objective. And once OS has regained the control, now OS can decide what to do, whether to switch to another process or let the current process running continue its execution. So what OS does now, it invokes a part of its code, which is called a scheduler. So within OS, there is a part of the OS code is called a scheduler, process scheduler. So basically, OS will call that process scheduler code to make a decision based on some policy. So that scheduler will basically have some algorithm, some policies, and based on that policy, it will decide whether to allow to continue the process A, the process which was running, or let us say switch to another process B. So that decision will be made by scheduler, which is a part of the OS itself. So actually OS is making the decision. Now, if it decides to switch to another process, let us say if it decides to switch to process B, then OS has to do the following thing. Then OS executes something which is called context switch. So I'll write it. This is an important term which we will keep on encountering again and again. So whenever a switch happens between processes, that thing is called context switch. So within, as we have already talked about, when a process A is running and it itself issues a system call, even then there is some kind of saving of the context of a process. The current state of the process, which is basically called its context, that is saved on the kernel stack and so on. We have seen that. But when it switches to another process, then something more has to be done, and that is basically called context switch. Generally, this is whenever we use the term context switch, it basically means we are switching to another process. So in OS books, whenever you will find this term context switch, basically it implies that one process is paused and another process will begin. So the CPU, the OS is going to switch between two processes. So during context switch, what happens? We save some register values of the current process. So current process is A. So I'm just using the name onto its kernel stack. Isn't it? So it has to save the current process state onto its kernel stack, and it will restore again few register values for the soon to be executing process, which is process B. We are calling it process B, which is going to soon execute on the system. So it is going to restore the register values for the process B. And then what it will do, it will switch to the kernel stack of B. So as I said, per process there is a kernel stack. So for process A, there will be separate kernel stack, and process B, there will be a separate kernel stack. Okay. So when process A is running, the stack pointer register will be pointing to the kernel stack of A. And when it has to switch to another process, then the stack pointer register value will be changed, so that it points to now to the kernel stack of process B. So maybe let me just show you the protocol diagram here, so to make the things more clear. So again, let me go back to this PPT. I will put this PPT into the OneNote itself later on. Yeah, I think this is the okay. So the exact sequence of the protocol that will happen. So there are three things which get involved. One is your OS at the kernel mode. Another is your hardware. Something hardware will do, something OS will do, and something your process will do when the process is executing in the user mode. So this is what we are writing here. Okay. So at the boot time, there is no process. OS starts running. It initializes your trap table, where basically you store the addresses of different system call handlers, and also as well as the timer interrupt handler. And then OS starts your interrupt timer. And this interrupt timer is basically in your hardware there will be an interrupt which will periodically raise that interrupt after some few milliseconds, whatever that value that OS sets. Okay. So now when let us say a process is running, let us say at some point of time process A was running, and it now a timer interrupt went off. Let us say the hardware issued a timer interrupt. So now at that point of time, what we have said, we will we'll save the context or the register values of A on the kernel stack of A, isn't it? We'll save the enough context of the process A onto its kernel stack. Then the hardware will change the CPU mode to elevate the privilege to kernel mode, and it will jump to the specific trap handler, which is your timer handler now, because now timer has been raised. So OS will execute the code which is meant for handling the timer interrupt. Okay, so what will happen now? So in the timer interrupt routine, generally we say there is a scheduler which is invoked. We are calling it switch routine here. So OS will call the scheduler, and let us say, the scheduler decides to switch. So then that switch function will be called, and during switching, this context switch function, we said that three things will happen. We will first save the so there is a subtle difference here. I will talk about that little later. Let me just. So here we will save the kernel context or the registers of process A into the PCB of A. So we have talked about what is PCB. What is PCB? Anybody remembers? PCB of a process. What do we call it? What is the full form?
Process control.
Process control block. So what does it? What it is basically?
It's a data structure.
It's a data structure which
Stores all the information related to
which stores all the important relevant information about that process. So when OS is running a process, OS will keep the every minute information which it needs to control that process in a data structure which is called process control block. Its process ID, its parent, its children processes, the file now the process has opened, and everything, including the registered values of that. So what will happen? OS will first save the kernel context. As I said, why I'm calling it kernel context. I'll explain a little later. But the thing is, it is going to save the current context of the process A into the PCB. And where is PCB residing? Where is the PCB will be residing? It will be residing in memory. Sorry. PCB what is happening here? So I'll not write it here. PCB is a data structure which will be residing in somewhere in the memory, in the OS memory. Okay, so it is going to save the kernel context of the process A into the PCB, and it will restore the kernel context of the another process which is going to run now from the PCB of that process. So similarly, there will be PCB of process B. So it is going to restore the kernel context or the register values from the PCB of the second process B, and it is going to switch to the kernel stack. So switching to kernel stack basically, so your stack pointer register, initially it was having the address of the kernel stack of A. So now it will switch to the address of the kernel stack of B. So, and then it will do return from tap instruction so that it can now the process B can start running. So it's slightly subtle, slightly think that when the process is paused, the kernel stack when the process is paused, it is using the kernel stack A, and if it comes back when it returns from OS, suddenly we have another kernel stack which is operating. Okay, so I'll explain little later on. Let me just complete this protocol diagram. So now what the hardware will do? Hardware is now going to use this kernel stack. So hardware is going to do the regular thing which it does when it returns from trap. It is going to restore the register values from the kernel stack, and currently now the kernel stack which is being pointed by is the kernel stack of B. So it is going to read from there and read from there and fill up the values of the registers and the user context. So there is a two different thing. One is called kernel context and is a user context that I'll explain, as I said, in a second. So it is going to restore that context from the kernel stack B. It is going to demote the privilege mode. It is going to change the CPU, the mode bit, so that now user modes will start. And it is now going to jump to the B's program counter. And as a result, process B will start executing, and that will happen. So there is a slight confusion, I think, that will be coming in your mind. What is this kernel context and what is this user context? So let me just explain you here what basically I mean by this. It is slightly subtle thing. It's not explained that way in books. So, but the actual way it happens is this only. So in the protocol diagram, what we saw is, in the protocol diagram that we just saw, we saw that there were two types of register, save and restore. The first one was basically we called user context, where the user registers of the running process are implicitly saved by the hardware on the kernel stack of that process. So the first one, which we have already seen even during the system call handling, that the user registers are saved by the hardware on the kernel stack of that process. But now during the context switch, we are seeing the second type of save and restore, which is basically where the kernel register values are now being explicitly saved by the software now. Now this is being done by the software, that is your OS itself, OS code itself, into the memory, which is basically the PCB of that process. PCB of the process. So the second type of save and restore is happening slightly differently here. The kernel registers are being explicitly saved by the OS into the PCB of that process. So what is kernel register and what is user register? So as I said, when the process is running in user mode, then that point of time, whatever register values are there, those are called user registers or user context. But when the same program is running in the kernel code during a system call or whatever, at that time, when the kernel part of the code is running, we are saying that is a kernel context. Because at that time also there will be some CPU register values and whatever. So all those things are called basically the kernel context. And that kernel context are saved into the PCB of the process by the software. So generally this context will be little larger, little more than the normal user context. So normal user context will be only be meant for running the program, running the whatever the program is running. Only those maybe CPU register values are meant for that. Only those will be saved. But the kernel context will be slightly large, slightly more. For example, kernel context will have a lot more information about that piece, about that process, because OS, which the process itself does not need to know, but OS keeps track of that, all that information for every process. So all that information is saved into the PCB. So why? Because when again this process has to resume, that information OS should know, and it will restore that value from that PCB. So I hope that's best what I can explain. If you have understood, it's well and fine. If you have not understood, don't worry about it here. After you read it from the book, probably it will become more clear, or as we discuss more things, it will become more clear. But if you have any question you want to ask at this point, please feel free to ask. Okay, so
sir, in the cooperative approach that you told about explicit yield.
Explicit int.
Can you repeat?
In the explicit yield function, yeah. So this is yield is another system call basically, which is explicitly called by the process. So what I'm saying is that we hope the OS will hope that any process which runs, it's going to do some system call at some point of the other, and at that point OS will regain the control. But let us say the process is just a fun process, it does not want to do anything, it's just doing some multiplication, some addition, some simple operations, and it doesn't but if it has run it for a sufficient amount of time, and now if it wants to give back the control, it will how can it give back the control? It will call this system call. So there were some explicit system calls like yield, which basically does nothing but just gives back the control to the OS. So these were popular when cooperative approach was being used. But as I said, now none of the OS actually now uses cooperative approach. So this is a deprecated system call. No, it's not used as such. Okay. So there is one more thing, I think, before I switch to the next topic. You may be, if somebody may be thinking, what happens if, let us say, while a trap is being handled, while an interrupt is being handled, let us say that another interrupt occurs. So let us say a process does a system call and a trap is issued, and that trap is being handled, and at that time timer interrupt goes off. So what will happen at that point? Won't it be a complex situation? Isn't it? Let us say a process did a system call, and to handle that system call, the OS has to do basically a trap handler, and while it is doing a trap handler, the timer interrupt was raised. So now, won't it be a problem?
Interrupts are priorities, right? So
interrupts are priorities. Okay.
So if there's a higher priority interrupt coming up, that will be served first.
Okay. Yeah. So normally timer interrupt will be given a higher priority, isn't it, than a normal system call. So at that point, then OS will have to pause the trap handler code, and has to now start executing the timer interrupt. So it is going to be little. So that's what we are not going to talk about that. We'll talk about that more when we talk about concurrency. This is a common problem as we saw in our introductory class also, when we were basically, when two processes or two threads were trying to increment a shared variable. At that point also, if there was a switch within while one process was doing something and there was a switch to another process, it would be a problem. We have the OS. Similarly here also, when OS is trying to handle one thing and there is a request comes to switch to some another thing, if that thing is not done properly, that will be a problem. So all those issues we'll be talking more detail in concurrency, but just to give a simple idea, one simple approach can be just to basically, when a OS is handling a particular system call, he can disable the timer interrupt for time being. OS has that privilege to disable the timer interrupt as soon as a trap handler comes to it. He's servicing that request. OS can disable for time being the timer interrupt, and then when the service is done, it can re-enable the timer interrupt. That is one simpler approach, but it is not an efficient approach because there is a chance of losing some important information, because timer interrupt can happen by interrupts can come when you're disabling interrupts. Interrupts can come from many sources, not from just from timer, but from other sources. Let us say some data transmission was being done by through network, and that data transmission completed. So generally an interrupt is sent to the OS to now do the next thing. So if you disable the interrupts, you will lose those notifications. So it's not an efficient way. Better way, we'll see how there are other ways by which concurrencies issues are handled. So we'll talk about those things later on, but just to keep those things into mind, there are some more details into it. It's not so easy. Everything is not so easy, but I hope we have some basic idea has come about the exact mechanism. So the third question that we raised, what happens if the process does something slow? And I think we have gone long back. Okay, anyhow, so the third, before talking about the third problem, where when you have to basically, when a process does something very slow, or that point of time some new process has to be switched, has to be started. So the next problem that we want to talk about is the problem of scheduling. How the OS decides which process should run and which process should pause. So there will be many processes waiting into the ready queue. How the OS decides which process should be given the turn. If the current process goes for a IO, and so as to optimally utilize the resources, OS will have, as we said, it invokes a scheduler, and scheduler will have some policy decision, some policy some policy, some algorithm through which it will decide which process to give chance. So that will be our next topic, but generally it is a very big topic too. So before that, I want to talk about one thing which we have missed, which I just purposely skipped, because I have not talked about system call in detail. So now, there are system calls for process related things. There are system calls. So when we talked about the process abstraction, we introduced some things about what process is all about, what is the PCB of a process, and so on. So at that point, ideally, I should have discussed the system calls related to process management. But I think here also it's a good time to talk about that before we talk about scheduler, because scheduler is a big topic. It will take 2-3 classes to complete that. So this is a small topic. I'll just complete it here. So so there are some specific system calls for different types, for different things for a process. So one system call that is used, which is for creating a new process. So whenever a new process has to be created or launched, then the system call which is available, which is called basically fork system call. So there is a POSIX, there is a POSIX system call API. I forgot the name. Basically, it's a standard. It's a common standard which is followed by most of the operating system which are POSIX compliant. So generally, they all will have these system calls which are, I'm writing it down here, and they will have the same name also. So for creating a new process, the POSIX system calls gives a system call which is called fork. And what this fork system call does, basically, it basically creates a new child process by forking from a parent process, from the parent process. Okay, so what it means basically, so in Linux, basically the ancestor or the grandfather or the, maybe what we say, the Brahmaji of the original and living entity of everybody is called init process. So init process is basically the ancestor, the ancestor of all processes. Now this process basically creates, this init process creates several child process for different types of, so if there is a system process has to run, it creates a system, it basically forks into a system process. Then for user, it will create another, it will fork into another child process which will be meant for user, and so on. And then within users, you may fork for for one particular user, let us say Ram, and another process for, let us say, some other user, let us say Radhika, and so on. And then within Ram may be using some processes. One process he may be using a word process, or it may be using a PPT, or so on. So in this way, there is a hierarchy of process, child and parent. So every process has a parent, and it may have also childs. The beginning of the ancestor of all things is called init process. So it is responsible for all other processes. It has basically control. It can kill any other process. Normally, a parent process can only kill its child process. No other process is allowed to kill other processes. But the init process has control over all the processes. So what happens when a fork is created? Basically, when a particular process calls a fork, a new child process will be created. So what happens? Let us try to understand during a fork. It's little interesting what happens actually. We have seen old movies. We have seen there were a lot of duplicate roles by hero. Nowadays we don't see so many duplicate roles. But in older movies, especially Amitabh Bachchan, all things, you will find his father. There will be a father also. He will be also Amitabh Bachchan. His son will also be Amitabh Bachchan, and some other things. So you'll have multiple copies. Similarly, fork does something similar. It basically has duplicate copies. So new child process that it will create basically by making exact duplicate of the parent's memory image. So what it basically means, so let us say you have a RAM. Normally OS memory resides in the beginning, and let us say a process P1 is residing somewhere. It is taking some memory of, let us say, 100 kilobytes. And this process basically invokes a fork system call. So this system call basically is going to create another process, which will be the child process, let us say C, which will also be allocated some memory in the RAM. And generally this memory will be exact duplicate copy of this process of the parent process. So it will also get an exact 100 kilobyte memory of the parent process, which basically invoke this fork system call. So let us take an example. Let us say if we write a main program, and let us say I printf something. Let us say I printf some value, some number 1, let us say, and then did a fork. And then after the fork, let us say I just do nothing but print another number, let us say 2. Let us say close it. Okay, so what this process A is doing, this current process is going to print, let us say process A is running. It first of all prints out 1. Then it calls fork. At this point of time, what will happen? Say process A is running. At this point of time, when fork is called, another process, child process, is created, which starts running from the same point of time, because it gets the exact code. So as I said, the memory of that process will be copied. So it will get the exact code of the process A, and even the program counter, all the register values which are there. So the program counter, it will have some register values. The program counter which will be telling which is the next instruction to be executed. The same value of the program counter will come in the child process also. So for the process A, the next instruction to be executed is this printf. Similarly, for process C, the next instruction that will be executed will be this printf instruction, because the program counter is having the same, is going to have the same addresses basically. So what will happen now? What should be the output then of this program? So after printing one, what can you see, what you can expect on the terminal? So process A will also continue. After fork, it is going to printf2, and process C also, after it is born from here, it continues. It starts execution from the next instance. It will not start from the main, from the beginning, because as I said, the exact duplicate will come here. So the instruction which is currently pointing, the program counter register which is pointing, will also remain the same. So it will going to execute just after, it is going to execute just the next instruction after the for. So as soon as it is born, it is going to start executing the same thing which the process A is doing, basically the next instruction. So it is also going to execute the printf instruction. So 2 will get printed 2 times. The order may change. Order may, if the process C may execute this instruction first and process A may execute this instruction first, that depends on how OS schedules the 2 processes. But both are going to execute this printf instruction. So 2 is going to come 2 times. So what I have basically told, that parent and child start executing just after fork and modify the memory data independently. So let us say you had some variable int C is equal to 0, and after fork if you do C++ or so on. Now this C variable, there will be separate C variable for process P, and there will be separate, I think C is the, let me say call it D, because there will be separate D variable for process P, and there will be separate copy of the D variable for process C. So if D is getting incremented, so initially before fork, both will have the value of D as 0. So now process A is going to increment its D to 0 to 1, and C is going to increment its D variable to 1. So in both cases, this D variable will be now 1. It's not going to become 2, because these are 2 separate copies. This D variable is separate copy. So they are going to modify the memory data independently, because these are 2 different processes which are executing 2 different memory locations. Although the code part remains the same almost, there is a way to change the code part also. We'll talk about that. Let me show you a code here. So I think that should be, I have some time. Yeah. Okay, so can you see this code? Maybe before this code, let me just mention one more thing. Then I'll just show this code and stop the class. There's one more detail which is remembered. This fork is a function system call. It also has a return value. Fork also has a return value, but it returns different values in the child and the parent process. And that is done on purpose, so that we can distinguish which is a parent process and which is a child process. So child process, in the child process, this fork system call is going to return the value which is 0. So the value which is, the value which will be, so the value which will be returned in the child process will be 0 by the fork system call, And in the parent process, the fork system call is going to return the process ID of child. And in case if the fork system call failed, the system was not able to create a new process, then it will return some negative value. So by that you can come to know if the process creation failed. So these three different values will be returned. For child process, the return value will be 0. In case of parent process, the fork system call is going to return the process ID of child. So what this code is doing basically, as you can see here, this process system, this code is basically printing a hello world and printing the process ID of that process. And then it is calling a fork system call. And it is returning a value. So the return value is stored in RC. In case if this RC is less than 0, I said it is negative value. In case that signifies that fork failed, and we basically exit. We don't want to do anything in that case. But if you want to, as I said, if I want to distinguish what the child process should do something else and the parent process should do something else, then we can use this return value to write a different code for child and a different code for process. So that is what we are doing here. We can choose an if-else condition to check what is the return value. If the return value is 0, then that means this is the child process, because only for the child process the return value is 0. So in that case, child can do something else. So here I'm doing a separate printf for child. I'm saying hello, I am child, and I'm going to print out my own PID, the child PID. Else, so if these two conditions are not there, that means the return value is a positive value, and positive value generally will be a PID of something. As I said, in the parent process you get the PID of the child, which will be normally a positive integer value. So then you know this is your parent process. So that means parent is going to run only this part of the else part will be run by the parent process, and this else if part will be run by the child process. So in the else part, what I'm saying, printf, the original process parent is basically saying hello, I am the parent of this. So he knows, as I said, RC is the child, is the process ID of the child. So that's why he knows what is the process ID of the child. So he's saying I am parent of the, he's going to print the process ID of the child, and also it is going to print the process ID of its own of its own, which is through the getPID function. So if I run this code, I've already compiled it. Let me go to the. So I have 4 programs, P1, P2, P3, P4. Right now I have just shown P1. If I run this code P1, as you can see, the first hello word has been only printed by the parent process, whose PID was 65. Now after fork, after fork, the child is going to print this the printf function that was put into printf, hello, I am child, and is going to tell its own PID, which is 66. And the parent process is doing only its own printf, hello, I am parent of 66, and it is telling its PID 65. So this was the expected output. And as you can see, through the return value that the fork returns, we can write a separate code for the parent and the child process. If we don't use the return value, then whatever code we write, both the parent and both the child process are going to execute the same code. But if you want the child process to do something different than the parent process, then we have this facility to use the return value to write a separate code for that using an if-else construct.